Hey guys, welcome back to Floki's Models. Going to be doing some weathering today on the Sd.Kfz 251/22. Starting out with doing some sponge chipping using Vallejo dark sand and a piece of packing foam locked in a set of tweezers. I'm using my wet palette to hold the paint. It's not a necessity, I just find it very convenient. Now to start, you dip the sponge into the paint and remove 90% of it onto a paper towel. When I start the chipping process, I like to start on the edges first and work my way inwards. I've found this as the best way to add a lot of tiny chips fast. I'll come back in with a paintbrush after I finish the sponge chipping to refine all this. While I was working on the weathering on this, I had a hard time getting my eyes to focus. Just all the tiny dots of the ambush pattern I don't know, it was just throwing me off. Now that I'm happy with the results from the sponge chipping, I'm going to use a 3-0 red sable brush to add more and refine what's there. Make sure to unload a small amount of paint from the brush before going to the model. I like to outline the edges using a tapping motion so it's not one continuous scratch but varies in sizes. Now to add some long scratches down the side panels. I usually use a 10-0 brush for this, but the one I've been using for years, well, I finally kinda killed it, and the bristles are all nasty on it now, so I need to get me a new one. So using the same 3-0 brush that I use for chipping, I'm gonna try to add some fine scratches with it, which, really didn't work out to my liking. By the time I got to this side, I think I got a lot better with controlling of the bigger brush. Now for steel chipping. First, I use 4 drops of Vallejo German Grey, 3 drops of Vallejo German Camo Black Brown, 2 drops of Luftwaffe Uniform, and 1 drop of Vallejo Dark Sand. I mix all this up with 1 drop of tap water and 1 drop of Vallejo Retarder Medium, and start adding it to the middle of only the larger light chips. Again, I like to start on the edges and work towards the center. I actually find this chipping process to be very relaxing, and I don't mind sitting here for a couple hours to do this. While that dries, I turn my attention to the PaK40 barrel. It's painted in red oxide primer, so to show some wear on it, I use a mix of Vallejo Flat Red and Old Rose. This gets sponge chipped onto the barrel using a broken off piece from a makeup sponge. I found makeup sponges to be great for sponge chipping, and a big bag of 30 sponges only costs like $4, and that's gonna last me a very long time. Now to add some streaking and dirt to the armor using Abteilung 502 oils. First, I'll add some dots of dust, followed by a few dots of bitume, and lastly some dots of industrial earth. Now taking a large flat brush, moistened with a little bit of clean thinner, I blend the dots in a downward motion. This does a couple things. One, it adds a filter to the paint to kind of unify all the colors even more, but I'm also making streaks with this that look like dirt that's been washed down the side of the armor by rain and water splashing up on the vehicle. I will also use a completely dry brush to help with this blending. You can keep working this as much as you want, and you can always add more dots of paint to streak down, and I end up coming back over the entire thing and adding more streaks later. On flat surfaces, I add the dots just the same, but when it comes to blending, I use a jabbing swirly motion to blend them all together. Again, switching from a brush just moistened with thinner to one that is completely dry. Again, you can blend these as much as you want, and don't be afraid to add more or use a little bit more thinner to take off spots that you really don't like. Next, I'm going to add a pen wash using Abteilung 502 Industrial Earth. And I'm going to thin it with VMS Oil Expert Enhancing Medium Matte. I'll apply this thin mixture around all the panel lines and around all bolts and other raised details on the model. After I hit all the places I want with this pen wash, I'll come back about 10 minutes after it's dried with some clean thinner and clean up any tide marks that are left over. Now for some mud effects using these products: AK Fresh Mud Enamel, MIG Gulf Sand Pigment, MIG Dark Mud Pigment, and VMS Texture Mixing Pigments. It makes your pigments have more texture but doesn't lose its color. This is a mix of dark mud and the Gulf Sand for a lighter mud color, again mixed with that VMS texture. First, brush on some of the AK Enamel Dark Mud color, Then take the pigments and add them to the surface. I load the brush up and then not actually touching the surface, but tapping the brush with my finger to drop the pigments on top of the enamel paint we just laid down. And then, of course, I can go back and tap in later, but I want to get some of that texture on there first. And then I take the lighter pigment and put this color on top to, just to have a varying color between dark and light mud, or darker mud and dried mud. Then you can either clean this up some, or you can add even more, just depending on what level you're going for. Now that I've got some practice on the road reels, I'm going to move over to actually doing it to the model. Now, this is the first time using this method. Normally I like using Vallejo texture paste or the stuff that you can get from AK. They're all about the same. I'm using the same process here that I used on the road reels, but instead I'm trying to blend the edges a little bit more to get a nice transition with the lighter mud color. Now let's add some mud splashes. For this I'll be using AK Enamel Fresh Mud. I load the brush up first and then hit a little bit off on just a piece of paper. And then using a toothpick, I stipple and splash the paint onto the surface. Then I come back and do the same thing using AK Enamel Dark Mud. Multiple colors just, add more interest. And here's the lower hull. I did end up cleaning this up some more, as you'll be able to see in the final shots. And here is the results of the weathering steps we just completed. Again, this is the first time I've used this pigment method of adding mud. I do like the results, but I prefer my normal method of Vallejo texture paste blended with water. Also, even though I locked the pigments in, they seem to still rub off easily if touched. That's not a problem with the mud texture products. Guys, thank you all so much for watching, and also a big thank you to all my subscribers. It's like, hell, we just hit the 600 mark. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the video and maybe found it helpful. Tell me down in the comments what you think of it, and subscribe if you haven't already. Of course, stay tuned for many more builds to come.